Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into the kind of place where you probably won't survive 5 minutes. And no, I'm not exaggerating. Imagine standing in the Egyptian desert, the horizon trembling like liquid glass, the sky a white hot dome that looks less like heaven and more like a heat lamp set on broil. The sand beneath your feet burns so fiercely, you swear you can feel it through your sandals. And every breath tastes like you're inhaling from an oven door. You squint, your eyes watering against the brightness, and already your skin feels like parchment left too close to a flame. And this is just the beginning, because in a few moments, you'll be asked to pick up limestone blocks, drag them across uneven terrain, and somehow not collapse into a tragic little pile of dust. It's a miracle anyone survived long enough to build pyramids out here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now, because I want to know which corner of the world you're in while we melt together in this desert haze. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan to some soothing music, and let's get going tonight. You shuffle forward, feeling the weight of the heat drape across your shoulders like a heavy cloak you can't take off. The air isn't just warm. It's alive, pressing against your chest until each breath is a negotiation. Your lips crack, your throat itches, and you realize water isn't just a drink out here. It's the difference between standing and fainting. Face first into the sand. The workers around you look impossibly calm, their bodies gleaming with sweat, their movements steady, almost graceful. But don't be fooled. This isn't casual. Every step they take is calculated survival. Every cloth wrapped over their heads a shield. Every break under a patch of shade a lifeline. And you, stumbling in wide-eyed, are already learning the first rule. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. The odd detail that hits you comes from the ground itself, mudbrick huts and woven reed awnings clustered near the worksite. Casting. Ragged patches of shade that look like gifts from the gods. Step into one and the temperature drops just enough that your heart stops pounding like a drum. The difference is so sharp, it's almost a joke, like walking from a pizza oven into the world's smallest air conditioner. You laugh to yourself, but it comes out dry, a rasp more than a chuckle, because humor takes moisture too. Somewhere nearby, a worker smears a mixture of oil and ground herbs across his arms, the glistening coat catching the sun like varnish. You think it looks like something out of a spa brochure, until you remember that without protection, skin here cracks, peels, and burns faster than kindling. Historians still debate whether these ointments were primarily medicinal, spiritual, or just plain practical. But standing here, you don't care what the reasoning was. You just want some of that miracle goo before your arms start sizzling. As you trudge closer to the blocks of stone waiting to be dragged, you imagine other cultures facing the same kind of battle. In medieval Persia, workers poured water onto courtyards to cool the air by evaporation. In 19th century Australia, settlers wrapped themselves in damp cloths to beat back the punishing sun. Even modern marathon runners shove ice under their caps during desert races. Different times, same problem. How do you keep a body alive when the air itself wants you dead? And here you are, just trying not to look like the weak link in a chain of workers who've already mastered tricks you haven't even begun to guess. Your mind wanders briefly, half delirious, to the most ridiculous detail you've ever read. That some Egyptians supposedly tried using crocodile dung as a kind of medicinal or protective substance. You can't help but laugh though. It comes out like a cough, because if someone offered you that right now with a promise of 5 extra minutes in the sun, you might actually consider it. Desperate times, desperate measures, right? And yet, the survival game here isn't really about desperate improvisation. It's about knowing the rhythms. When to step into shade, when to cover your head, when to sip instead of gulp. Get that wrong, and the desert eats you. Around you, the sight thrums with noise stone dragging across sand, shouted commands, the slap of sandals, and the low hum of voices trading jokes to make the labor bearable. You realize quickly that the heat isn't just a physical enemy, it's psychological. If you let it convince you you're beaten, you are. Survival here means grinning when your brain screams. Pretending the sweat dripping into your eyes is just another minor inconvenience. And laughing along even when your throat feels like sandpaper. You hear one worker mutter, "At least the fiandesil." Sun never oversleeps, and it makes you smile because humor is oxygen here. It's the only way to remind yourself you're more than a piece of meat slowly roasting in Ra's giant celestial skillet dot. And as the sun climbs higher, blazing mercilessly, you realize this isn't just about building monuments. It's about building resilience, brick by brick, shade by shade, breath by breath. Because out here, the first lesson is clear. The desert doesn't care if you're a king or a laborer, a visitor or a native. Survive its heat, and you've earned the right to take one more step forward. Fail, and you'll be nothing more than another forgotten grain of sand swept away by the wind. The first rule might be shade, but the second rule is water, and you quickly realize that out here water isn't just something you drink. It's the true pharaoh, the ruler of every choice and every step. The Nile may look close on a painted map, but when you're standing on the edge of a construction site, lips already cracked and tongue heavy in your mouth, the river feels like it's on the other side of the world. Workers know this, which is why clay jars, leather skins, and ceramic basins dot the edges of the site like lifelines. Each jar is more precious than gold, sweating faintly with coolness where damp cloths are wrapped around them, the ancient version of a fridge. You shuffle toward one, desperate for a sip, but then stop yourself, because you've noticed something. They don't drink recklessly. The men and women here dip in careful gulps, wetting their mouths, swishing, swallowing slow, as though every drop has to negotiate its way down the throat. It's almost theatrical, this ritual of sipping, but you can tell it's survival. Chug water, and you'll sweat it out faster than you can say, "Rah," leaving your body emptier than before. Sip, and the water lingers, soaking into the system. Like hidden treasure. What amazes you is the system behind it. Canals snake toward the site. Narrow streams guided by hand-dug ditches that look fragile but work like veins feeding an arm. Buckets pass in chains from worker to worker, sloshing, dripping, splashing against bare legs, and you notice how quickly they patch leaks with mud or palm fiber. No wasted movement, no wasted drop. Historians still debate how far workers had to travel for water and whether massive storage cisterns stood near the pyramids themselves. But the evidence of obsession is clear. No water, no work, no life. And you can't help but smile when you remember how even medieval builders in Europe carried barrels of beer to quench thirst, since water often wasn't safe to drink. Different place, different drink, but same rule. Hydration is everything, whether you're laying limestone blocks or stacking cathedral stones. Dot and odd detail catches your eye a man dipping a reed into his jar and sucking water through it like a straw. At first you think it's a quirk, then you realize it's genius. By pulling water through slowly, he not only keeps dirt from swirling up from the bottom, but also rations every mouthful. You try it awkwardly and nearly choke on your first attempt, but soon the trick works and the coolness coats your throat in a way that feels miraculous. You almost laugh at yourself, realizing you've been humbled by a 3,000-year-old survival. Heck, that's still smarter than your fancy modern water bottle. Your thoughts wander to other cultures, obsessed with water as survival. In medieval North Africa, travelers crossing the Sahara would bury clay jars in shaded pits. Returning days later, to find the water still cool, while caravans carried goatskins swollen with liquid that sloshed like living creatures. In 19th century American deserts, pioneers rationed sips by the spoonful. Each gulp counted like currency. And even today, ultramarathoners in scorching climates know the secret isn't carrying the most water, it's learning to manage the rhythm of thirst. Across the ages, the desert plays the same trick, and humans keep learning the same lesson. But water isn't just practical, it's also political. You overhear workers murmuring about supervisors who ration unfairly, doling out jars to favorites, while others are left parched. A joke ripples through the group. The stone may belong to Pharaoh, but the jar belongs to him who carries it. Everyone laughs, but you catch the bitterness under the humor. Control the water, and you control the people. It's a rule as old as time. You think of Roman aqueducts, vast arches striding across the land to deliver life, but also symbols of imperial power. You think of modern cities where taps run dry and riots begin, proof that water has always been both a gift and a weapon. And then comes the strangest moment of the day. You watch as a boy pours water onto a flat stone slab, then weighs his hand. Over the surface, smiling as the heat evaporates it instantly. For a brief second, the air cools, the vapor rushing upward like a tiny invisible umbrella. It's the same principle medieval Persians would use to cool entire courtyards by spraying water onto tiles, and the same principle behind modern swamp coolers humming in desert towns today. You grin, because once again, ancient survival turns out to be timeless science. By the time you finally take your measured sip, the sun has shifted higher, punishing the sand until it radiates heat back into the air like a second sun. Your skin prickles, your scalp itches under your headcloth, but the water steadies you. It doesn't taste clean, more like stone mud, and a hint of something metallic, but it feels alive inside you, threading strength back through tired muscles. You look around at the workers and realize water isn't just hydration here. Morale, rhythm, the heartbeat of the site. Without it, the great monuments of Egypt would still be nothing but blueprints on the back of a papyrus scroll. With it, the impossible becomes possible, one careful sip at a time. And as you wipe your lips, you can't help but chuckle to yourself. Forget the pharaohs and their golden masks. The true king of Egypt is this muddy, lukewarm jar that keeps you standing in the furnace of the desert. The water steadies you, but soon you realize survival here isn't only about what you swallow. It's about where you stand when the sun decides to turn the desert into a griddle. You step away from the jars and squint across the site, and the light is almost violent, bouncing off pale limestone until it feels like knives stabbing at your eyes. Every breath tastes baked, every shadow looks like treasure, and the workers know it too. You notice them gravitating not toward the open spaces, but toward strips of shade created by stretched linen cloths, palm mats tied between poles, or even the slanted sides of unfinished walls. To your surprise, there's a rhythm to it, like a choreographed dance. The blocks rise, the shadows shift, and the workers shuffle their tasks to chase the shade. It's survival, not by brute force, but by cunning geometry, turning the sun itself into part of the schedule. You settle onto a mudbrick bench beneath one of these cloth awnings, and it feels like stepping into another world. The air is still hot, but the difference is sharp, as though the shade itself is a balm. A man beside you grins through cracked teeth and mutters something that makes the others laugh, probably a joke about tourists fainting in the first hour. You chuckle too, because honestly, he's not wrong. You'd probably be on the ground, already without their tricks. Historians still debate whether official rest schedules were enforced by overseers or whether workers created their own pauses when the sun reached its cruelest angle. But either way, the result is the same. Nobody lasts long under direct fire. And it's not laziness. It's survival science centuries before someone invented the word. Odd details keep catching your eye. Some workers wear headcloths soaked in water, the fabric dripping slowly down their necks, creating a cooling effect. Not unlike the sports towels you see athletes sling around their shoulders today. Others clutch palm fronds and wave them lazily, not just to fan themselves but to keep flies away, an unending nuisance that thrives in the heat. One man even presses a clay pot to his chest, the vessel still damp from the Nile, letting it cool. Surface leach the fire from his skin. It's ingenious, low-tech, and absolutely essential. You think of how medieval farmers in Europe took breaks under hedgerows during harvest, or how Ottoman workers built domed fountains in courtyards to create pockets of cool air. Even in 20th century factories, bosses learned to stagger shifts because heat exhaustion ruined production. Across time, across cultures, the same truth reigns. You don't fight the sun head-on, you work around it. And yet, the heat isn't just a physical enemy. It's a social one too. You notice how shade becomes status. The overseers sit beneath the largest awnings, their sandals barely dusty, while the common laborers huddle against scraps of wall or crawl under scaffolding beams, cramming together for every scrap of shadow. A quiet tension lingers. Who gets the best spot? Who pretends not to notice the worst? It reminds you of modern office life, when the corner with the best air conditioning becomes a coveted throne. Different millennium, same human squabbles. Then comes the moment that really makes you laugh. A boy clambers onto a half-finished block and stretches his own robe between two sticks, creating a miniature tent that barely shades his head. His companions jeer, tossing sand his way, but when he ducks smugly into his handmade refuge, they can't help but clap. It's the most ridiculous, brilliant hack you've seen. All day a portable shade hut, centuries before pop-up camping gear. You almost want to stand and applaud. And as the hours crawl forward, you realize that the shade strategy is part of a larger rhythm. Work intensifies at dawn, slows near noon, and resumes as the shadows lengthen again. You watch as entire crews vanish into mudbrick shelters during the worst of the midday blaze, only to emerge later with renewed energy. Inside those huts, the air is cooler, the walls made from earth that holds night's chill a little longer. You poke your head inside, one and nearly sigh with relief, the dimness wrapping around you like a cave. Someone snores softly in the corner, another chews quietly on a strip of dried fish, and for a moment it feels more like a village than a worksite. That's the secret. You think not just finding shade, but building community inside it. Desert punishes, but together, with jokes, naps, and shared figs, people endure. You can't help but remember medieval accounts of European peasants napping under haystacks, or Japanese farmers taking tea breaks in bamboo groves. Different sun. Same instinct. Hide, rest, return. By the time you step back outside, the sun has shifted, the awnings casting new patterns, and you realize you've stumbled into a choreography older than pyramids. Work, pause, hide, endure. Survival isn't a sprint here, it's a long dance. With the shadows, and only those who learn the steps make it to sundown without collapsing. You take a deep breath, the air still hot but bearable, and smirk to yourself. Shade may not sound like much of a weapon, but in this desert, it's the sharpest blade of all. Just when you think you've mastered the dance with shade, another question rises hotter than the sand under your sandals. How do you protect skin that's being roasted every single day beneath the fiercest sun on earth? You glance around and realize these workers aren't just sweating through linen. Their survival depends on layers of strange concoctions, shimmering oils, and even downright bizarre mixtures that make you wonder if ancient Egyptians doubled as skincare influencers. The first thing that catches your eye is the gleam men rubbing themselves with castor oil, sesame oil, or resin that glistens in the light like polished bronze, turning sweat into something almost theatrical. It's not just vanity, it's armor, a thin film meant to keep the skin from cracking open like dry mud. You catch a whiff of something sharp and earthy, and then you see it. Natron, the chalky white salt scraped from dried lake beds, being rubbed onto forearms and shoulders until the workers look like half-baked statues. Odd? Yes. Effective? Maybe. Historians still debate whether natron was used purely for cleansing, or whether workers believed it shielded them from heat and disease. Either way, it leaves their skin streaked and pale, a ghostly sight under the merciless sun. And then comes the detail that makes you smirk. Someone mentions mixing animal fats into the oils, and suddenly you can't help picturing a sweaty man basting himself like a holiday roast before heading back to carved stone. Was it protection? Was it ritual? Or was it just another case of humans throwing whatever was handy onto their skin and hoping for the best? You're not sure, but you know one thing. Compared to crocodile poop sunscreen from Egypt's neighbors, greasy fat lotion doesn't sound quite so terrible. The air carries another note sweet, floral, almost cloying. You follow it and spot a jar of perfumed oil, probably spiked with myrrh or frankincense. Substances so valuable they were traded like gold. The idea makes you laugh, softly men dripping, with sweat yet smelling like offerings from a temple, survival crossed with spa day. You imagine one of them complaining that the rosemary scent is too strong, while the desert sun beats down like a hammer. And then, a darker thought. What if these oils didn't just block the sun, but also hid the stench of exhaustion? Survival wasn't only about the body, but about dignity too. You picture a noble passing by, wrinkling his nose at workers without. Oils, deciding in an instant who looked civilized and who looked like an animal. It reminds you of Roman bathers centuries later, slathering themselves in perfumes, or medieval nobles powdering themselves with crushed herbs to mask the rot of unwashed skin. The pattern repeats. Scent isn't only survival, it's social camouflage. You squint at the desert glare again, and it strikes you, these oils shine so brightly they act like tiny mirrors, bouncing back light, creating a shimmer that's almost protective. It's primitive, sure, but not far from the reflective zinc creams lifeguards smear on their noses today. And yet, the strangeness doesn't stop there. A man tells a tale, half laughing, about an ancestor who swore by clay masks mixed with donkey milk, painting his face before work as though he were stepping into battle. You chuckle because it sounds absurd, but deep down you know people everywhere reach for odd remedies when desperation and heat collide. You remember stories of Native Americans using mud packs to cool burns, or medieval soldiers rubbing vinegar on their arms during summer marshes. Maybe the donkey milk wasn't so ridiculous. After all, what makes it even more fascinating is the debate historians still argue whether these practices were born of genuine medical insight, ritual superstition, or just tradition repeated until no one questioned it. Was the oil truly blocking sun damage, or was it simply a symbol of being part of the team, an unspoken badge that said, I belong here, I endure like the rest? You watch as a group of men rub oil onto each other's backs, laughing, slapping shoulders slick with sheen. And you realize it's more than skin care. It's bonding, ritual, and survival rolled into one slippery gesture. And it's not just Egypt. Across the seas, Polynesian voyagers used coconut oil for both skin and sails. Medieval knights wore padded cloths dipped in vinegar to cool under armor. And even in the 20th century, soldiers in desert campaigns slathered themselves in makeshift salves to avoid cracking skin. Every era invents its own sunscreen, some more fragrant than others. You take another look at your own reflection in a jar of water and laugh quietly. Without oils, you're already scorched. Pink as clay. With oils, you'd glisten like a roasted lamb. Either way, the desert doesn't care. The trick, you realize, isn't about looking pretty. It's about tricking your skin into surviving one more day. And maybe that's the true hook beneath. Every glossy sheen and every pungent perfume lies the same desperate whisper. Don't let the sun win. You close your eyes, inhale the mix of resin and sweat, and tell yourself that survival here isn't just about muscles or water jars. It's about turning your body into its own fortress, even if that fortress smells like a spice market mixed with a barnyard dot. Your stomach growls before your brain catches up, reminding you that no matter how much water or shade you find, survival in the desert also means fuel for the body. And the fuel here isn't luxury feasts or roasted delicacies. It's the humble, simple foods that keep thousands of workers on their feet, day after day. You glance over to a shaded corner of the worksite, where baskets and clay jars are lined up, and suddenly you understand the rhythm of their lives. Bread, onions, figs, and above all, beer. Not the frothy golden kind you might picture from a commercial, but a thick, porridge-like brew that smells faintly sour, sweet, and earthy all at once. You wrinkle your nose, imagining a smoothie that's half breakfast, half punishment, but then you remember this strange drink provided. Hydration, calories, and even some minerals, the lifeline of the pyramid builders. You take a bite of rough bread, heavy and dense, grains ground by hand and baked in clay ovens, the crust so tough it threatens to crack a tooth. But once you chew through it, there's a warmth that spreads across your chest, paired with onions. Sharp enough to sting your nose, the meal isn't glamorous, but it's effective. Workers swore onions gave strength, so much so that pharaohs ordered vast supplies for the workforce. And here's your odd detail. There are records of massive onion deliveries, suggesting this humble vegetable was treated almost like currency, proof that in Egypt's economy, the onion was king of the desert. You can't help but laugh, softly imagine. Working for onion wages, your paycheck sizzling in a stew pot by nightfall. Still, the system worked, because those onions provided vitamin C, keeping scurvy at bay long before anyone knew what a vitamin was. The figs come next, sticky and sweet, bursting with sugar that hits your tongue like candy in a world without. Dessert. They're messy, they're dusty, but they fuel the body like little packets of sunlight. And suddenly, you realize why the ancients considered them gifts from the gods. Beer, bread, and figs. This was survival cuisine long before energy. Bars and protein shakes. Historians still debate whether this diet was enough to sustain such brutal labor, or whether workers supplemented it with fish from the Nile, lentils, and the occasional cut of meat. Some argue the rations were generous, proof that workers were valued rather than enslaved, while others suggest the bare-bones simplicity shows how expendable the masses really were. You sip from a jug of beer and wince. It's thick, grainy, like drinking wet bread, but it soothes your parched throat. Better than water that might be crawling with bacteria. And you can't help but think of medieval peasants in Europe drinking small beer daily for the same reason, or Mongol herders relying on fermented Marais milk, or even soldiers in World War I guzzling wheat beer in the trenches when clean. Water was scarce. Across eras and continents, the pattern is the same. People cling to fermented drinks, not for pleasure, but for survival. You wipe the sweat from your brow and glance at the workers joking as they eat, breadcrumbs stuck in, beards, wine-colored figs staining their fingers, and you realize food is more than fuel. It's morale. The act of chewing, of sharing, of breaking bread side by side, keeps people moving as much as the calories themselves. You picture medieval farmers singing over bowls of pottage, or 19th century sailors joking around their salted pork rations, or even modern athletes scarfing down bananas on the sidelines. Humor and food are inseparable, especially when survival is on the line. A worker beside you cracks a joke, pointing at his onion like it's a prized jewel, and laughter ripples through the group. For a moment, the heat feels lighter, the sun less crushing, because the meal reminds everyone that they're still human, not just laboring shadows. And yet, indulgence carries risk. Too much bread and beer, and you feel sluggish, heavy, as though the desert floor itself is pulling you down. Too little, and you wobble, your legs shaky, your vision blurring like the horizon. The balance is delicate, and you realize that the true secret here isn't just having food, but knowing how much to eat, how to pace your fuel, the same way you pace your steps under the sun. You smirk, thinking about modern gym-goers obsessed with macros and protein shakes, and it strikes you, they're just repeating the ancient lesson. Survival starts with the stomach. You finish your portion, licking fig juice from your fingers, and lean back, imagining how many meals like this built the pyramids stone by stone. Not gold, not feasts, but onions and bread, day after day, thousands of bites carrying thousands of bodies through unbearable heat. The thought humbles you and makes you laugh at the same time, because it's proof that history isn't written by kings alone. It's written by what people ate when no one was watching. You stretch, sigh, and let the taste linger on your tongue, knowing the desert will demand its price again soon. And all you can do is hope your stomach keeps up. You wipe your mouth after the rough bread and beer, thinking you've seen it all. But then you glance around and realize survival here isn't just about what goes into your body, it's about what covers it. Forget the Hollywood image of half-naked workers gleaming under the sun, muscles straining bare against stone. The reality is linen, lots of it, the simplest, most practical fabric the ancient world had to offer. You watch men moving blocks, their bodies wrapped in loose tunics, legs covered, heads draped in cloth that flutters with each step, and suddenly you understand. Fabric is armor, and without it the desert would flay them alive. The linen is pale, almost white, woven from flax fibers grown along the Nile, and it catches the sunlight so harshly that it almost glows, like a field of ghosts working in rhythm. You step closer, running your fingers along the edge of a discarded headcloth, and its light almost insubstantial. Yet when you drape it over your shoulders, you feel the air shift, the fabric breathing in place of your skin, deflecting the sun instead of absorbing it. And here's the odd detail: linen doesn't just cover, it cools when wet, and workers sometimes soak their tunics in water, so every breeze turned into relief, their own portable air conditioning. Thousands of years before electricity. You chuckle softly, picturing someone today with a linen-soaked hoodie, claiming they'd hacked the desert, as if Egyptians hadn't done it millennia ago. Historians still debate whether workers wore only the basic kilt-like shendit for ease of movement, or if the headcloths and tunics were standard, depending on status, task, or even the overseer's mood. Some argue bare torsos were practical, while others point to paintings and preserved textiles, suggesting a culture that valued protection over bravado. What isn't debated is that without fabric, skin burns and sand cuts deep, so linen was as essential as bread or water. You glance up at a foreman pacing the rows, his tunic dyed faintly saffron, marking his authority, while common workers stick to bleached white or dusty beige, proof that even clothing became a social code in the blinding heat. It reminds you of medieval Europe, where peasants wore coarse wool and nobles flaunted dyed silks, or of desert nomads in North Africa, whose flowing robes weren't fashion, but survival each layer, creating insulation against the punishing sun. Even in modern armies stationed in hot climates, loose uniforms echo the same principle: cover more to suffer less. You laugh quietly, realizing the shirtless hero trope would have lasted about 5 minutes before heat stroke took him out of the story. A worker beside you tugs his headcloth tighter around his jaw as the wind kicks up, sand swirling in. Gritty clouds and you see the wisdom of every fold. The desert isn't just hot, it's sharp, every gust carrying knives of sand that scrape eyes, noses, and mouths. The linen turns into a shield, a mask, a filter, proving that survival here wasn't about toughness alone, but about adapting your wardrobe to the battlefield. And yet, despite the practicality, you notice small details of vanity. A belt knotted carefully, a tunic hem stitched with faint designs, someone wearing an amulet on a cord under the cloth. You smirk, because even in the desert, humans can't resist adding flair, turning survival gear into fashion. It makes you think of Japanese workers tying hachimaki headbands, or miners in 19th century Europe carving patterns into their lunch tins, not because it helped survival, but because it reminded them they were more than laboring bodies. Here's another odd thought. Some Egyptians shaved their entire heads, not just for ritual purity, but because hair trapped heat and lice, so headcloths replaced hair itself. Imagine thousands of bald workers shimmering under linen caps, each one a mirror, catching the sun, survival and hygiene tangled together in one simple act. Across the centuries, echoes repeat. Bedouins with keffiyehs, Tuaregs with indigo veils, even 20th century explorers wrapping scarves in desperate imitation. Everyone learns the same lesson. Eventually, bare skin is weakness. Cloth is strength. You adjust the cloth in your hands again and feel its coolness settle like a sigh across your shoulders. And suddenly, you get it. The linen isn't just fabric, it's the quiet companion, the uncelebrated hero, the difference between finishing the day's labor and collapsing in the sand. You chuckle to yourself, picturing someone back then grumbling, "Don't forget, your headcloth or you'll regret it," the ancient version of bring sunscreen. And you realize with a grin that maybe the real secret of survival wasn't stone cutting or engineering at all. It was laundry. You take another step, sand crunching under your sandals, cloth brushing your skin like a whisper, and the desert seems a little less merciless. Not softer, never soft, but survivable, as long as you wear your armor not in steel, but in threads spun from the Nile's quiet gift. You think the linen has given you all the answers, the cloth that turns skin into stone against the desert sun, but then you hear it, a sound like 1,000 whispers carried on the wind, the faint clatter of wooden poles and reeds rustling. Together, you follow it, curious, and stumble upon something even stranger. The workers aren't just wrapping themselves in fabric, they're building shadows. Tall wooden frames rise from the sand, covered in mats of woven palm leaves, creating pockets of darkness where none should exist, like islands floating in the glare. You step into one, and it's as if you've fallen into another world, the temperature dropping instantly, the air shifting from knife-edge heat to something almost bearable. It's not much still hot enough to bake bread if you set it on a stone, but compared to the furnace outside, it feels like paradise. The hook hits you. Survival here wasn't about fighting the desert head-on. It was about tricking it, creating false skies and artificial oases where the body could pretend. For a moment, it wasn't on fire. And here's the odd detail. You notice workers splashing water across the reed mats, the droplets catching the sunlight before sinking into the fibers. And suddenly, the shadows breathe cool air. A primitive swamp cooler centuries before engineers gave it a fancy name. You laugh quietly, because it's the same principle as putting a fan in front of a wet towel today, except instead of DIY YouTube hacks, it's life or death on the Giza Plateau. Historians still debate whether these shade canopies were widespread or only used in certain phases of construction, but no one denies that some form of shelter had to exist, because no human body can toil for 12 hours straight under that, sung without collapsing. Some argue about massive tents, others about movable shelters carried along with the laborers. But either way, the desert was not simply endured, it was negotiated with. You picture medieval crusaders building makeshift awnings from their banners in the Levant, or miners in 19th century California hammering wooden planks together to shield their camps. And you realize humans everywhere instinctively build shadows as soon as the light grows cruel. One worker near you ducks into the shade, his shoulders sagging as if the canopy itself has lifted a mountain off his back. Another laughs, pouring a trickle of water down his neck, steam rising briefly as if he's mocking the sun. And still, life pushes on. You notice small details that make you grin. A jug of beer tucked under the cool mat to keep it from spoiling. A child chasing a lizard into the darker sand. Even a cat curled up in the corner, wise enough to claim the best seat, in the shade. And then the strangest rumor reaches your ears. Some Egyptians supposedly raised pigeons in shaded coops along construction sites, not just for food but for their droppings, which were mixed into fertilizer for the flax fields that fed the linen. Supply, shade, birds, cloth, survival, everything tied in a cycle that made the desert just a little less brutal. You can't help laughing, thinking how bizarre it would be to connect pigeon poop to pyramid building, but survival rarely cares about elegance. The debate among historians still rattles on. Were these shades organized by the overseers, a calculated investment in worker efficiency, or were they makeshift, born from workers stringing palm mats together in desperation? The answer may be lost, but the image remains. Men carving eternal stone while crouching under flimsy huts of sticks and leaves, giants of labor resting in shadows as fragile as spiderwebs. It makes you think of Ottoman hammams centuries later, where steam created artificial climates, or Japanese tea gardens with shaded pavilions that turned heat into ritual instead of punishment. Everywhere, the human instinct was the same bend nature, even if only slightly, to give the body room to endure. You lean back against a reed pole, the fibers scratching your skin, and you close your eyes for a moment. A sun still blazes. The desert still roars. But here in this fragile pocket of shade, you feel the secret the builders knew. Survival isn't about conquering the desert. It's about carving out enough illusion of comfort to last another hour, another day. You open your eyes, watching dust motes spin in the filtered light, and you smirk to yourself. Maybe the pyramids weren't just monuments to pharaohs. They were monuments to patience, to the art of survival, stitched together from linen, shade, and stubborn laughter in the face of a sun that never let up. You think you've seen every trick water jars hauled across sand, linen shields against the sun, reed canopies breathing cool air, but then you realize there's one more layer of survival here, one that isn't carved in stone or woven in cloth, but etched into the rhythms of the people themselves. As the day stretches, you notice the way work rises and falls, like a song carried on the wind. The morning begins before the sun even peaks above the horizon, when the desert still holds the ghost of night's chill. Torches flicker, shadows stretch long across the sand, and men shuffle into position, their tools clinking against baskets. And ropes. It's a quiet hour, heavy with yawns, but the air is kind, the only mercy the desert offers. And so the hardest tasks are tackled, then hauling blocks, carving stone, dragging sledges. By mid-morning, the voices grow louder, laughter bursts more often, and you can almost fool yourself into believing this is just another job, not the slow duel with heat. Then the sun climbs higher, its weight pressing down on every shoulder, and you see the change. The rhythm breaks into fragments, tasks become shorter, pauses stretch longer, and someone sings a low, steady chant that matches the heaving of ropes, giving tired arms a pulse to follow. You realize songs aren't just music here, they're survival, keeping pace, disguising exhaustion as rhythm. And then comes midday, the hour no one defies. Work slows to a crawl. Bodies slink into shade, voices fade into whispers. The desert at noon feels like a beast crouched on your chest, daring you to move, and only fools pretend they can fight it. Historians still debate how formal these breaks were, whether overseers enforced them like clockwork, or whether workers themselves learned to pace their bodies with instinct older than any rule. But the silence at noon speaks louder than debate. It says survival means knowing when to rest before the sun burns your strength into dust. By afternoon, the rhythm shifts. Again, slower but steady, as though every man has bargained with his body to push a little more. The blocks still move, the chisels still scrape, but every gesture carries the weight of negotiation. How much effort can you spend now without collapsing later? And finally, as the sun dips low, the air softens, the wind cools, and a strange energy returns. Laughter rings sharper, gossip grows bolder, and the day's last tasks are finished almost with relief. Some workers splash water on their heads, others sip beer from clay mugs, their faces shining with salt and dust. And you sense it. The rhythm isn't just about labor. It's about morale, about ending the day with enough spirit to face the next. Odd details stick out. You hear that in some medieval monasteries, monks used bells to structure their days into labor, prayer, and rest, echoing the same rhythm of endurance. In 19th century factories, whistles carved time into shifts, forcing bodies into mechanical patterns that workers learned to survive with jokes, songs, and stolen breaks. Even today, athletes train with intervals, rest as vital as motion, proving the same truth the Egyptians carved in sweat. You survive not by constant struggle, but by breathing with the rhythm of the world around you. Someone beside you mutters. A story how once a pharaoh tried to push the laborers harder, cutting their rest to speed the work, only to watch men collapse in waves until progress slowed to nothing. The tale might be legend, but it lingers, a reminder that even kings bowed to the sun's clock. You can't help but smirk at the thought. The most powerful man in the world, outsmarted not by armies or rivals, but by heat and fatigue, survival, laughs at titles. As twilight paints the sand in gold, you walk among the workers returning to their huts, their songs carrying into the dark. Children run to greet them. Wives offer water and bread, and for a moment, the desert feels almost kind. You realize the rhythm isn't just physical, it's communal, a bond that wraps every worker in a pattern of shared endurance. The heat may have tested their bodies, but it was the rhythm work, rest, song, laughter that carried them through. And maybe that's the final lesson etched here. Endurance isn't about fighting every second. It's about learning when to bend, when to breathe, when to wait. You inhale, the air cooling on your tongue, and think the pyramids weren't built just with stone and sweat, but with rhythm, patience, and the quiet knowledge that survival belongs to those who pace themselves. You think you've uncovered every layer of endurance, water, shade, food, rhythm, but then another truth rises, sharper than the sun itself. Survival in the desert wasn't only about the body, it was about the spirit. You wander past the huts as night settles, and you hear voices not groaning with exhaustion, but lifted in chants and laughter. A circle forms around a flickering lamp, men humming low, women weaving baskets by firelight, children giggling as they toss pebbles in little games. It strikes you that this fragile, glowing thread of humanity was as necessary as any jug of water. The desert strips you bare, but community stitches you back together. Someone begins a story, the kind that wraps history in myth, telling of a foreman who once collapsed in the heat, only to rise again when his comrades poured water over him, as if the Nile itself had breathed life back into his chest. You can almost see it, the gasp, the cheer, the belief that survival wasn't about a single man's strength, but the net of hands ready to lift him. Historians still debate how much of the builders' songs and rituals were for faith, for coordination, or for rebellion hidden in melody. But what isn't debated is that music, prayer, and humor became tools sharper than chisels. And here's your odd detail. Some records suggest workers mocked the heat by giving it nicknames, treating the sun as if it were a lazy overseer whose glare could be tricked with laughter. Imagine that outwitting the desert by roasting it. With jokes, you grin because it feels familiar. People today still curse traffic or tease the weather as if naming the misery takes away its bite. You sit closer, listening as another tale is told. This one about an old man who swore he saw gods walking through the haze of the desert, guiding workers toward shade when they thought they'd collapse. Was it truth, hallucination, or hope? Made visible? Historians still debate whether visions in the heat were sacred encounters or simply mirages born of exhaustion. But in the desert, survival sometimes depends on believing in things you can't prove. Faith, whether in gods, comrades, or tomorrow's cooler breeze, becomes a shield against despair. The fire crackles, sparks drift like tiny stars, and you feel a strange peace settle. The chatter around you ebbs and flows, gossip about grain, rations mixing with laughter at clumsy mistakes. And you realize humor wasn't just distraction, it was defiance. To laugh in the desert was to say, "You haven't broken me yet." Across the centuries, you remember echoes of the same pattern. Sailors on medieval voyages singing sea shanties through storms, prisoners of war in the 20th century telling, jokes in camps to keep dignity alive, workers in 19th century mines inventing songs that made darkness bearable. Different times, same truth laughter is survival's quiet twin. A child runs past, chasing a dog through the sand, and for a heartbeat, you forget the weight of the desert. Life insists on blooming, even in places designed to crush it. And maybe that's the real secret the Egyptians carried. Endurance wasn't grim silence. It was finding ways to stay human when the desert tried to erase you. You stretch out, feeling the night wind cool against your skin, carrying scents of bread baking in clay ovens, mingled with the dust of the day's labor. The stars scatter across the sky in a sweep of silver, the same stars that guided caravans, armies and dreamers across the ages. For a moment, you think about how many others have looked up from harsh worlds, whispering songs or jokes just to stay sane. The builders weren't just carving pyramids, they were carving survival strategies into human memory. And you, standing among their echoes, realized the final test wasn't how much heat they could endure, but how well they could keep their spirit alive beneath it. Survival here was never just about sweat. It was about faith in the morning, humor in the evening, and the shared heartbeat of a people who refused to let the desert have the last laugh. You walk away from the circle of voices, the songs still humming faintly in your chest, and the desert night wraps around you with a coolness so sharp it feels unreal after the day's furnace. The stars scatter above like shattered glass, brighter than any city light you've ever known. And suddenly, you realize the desert isn't just testing the body by day, it's testing the mind by night. Every sound is amplified. The creak of ropes, the shuffle of sandals, the whisper of wind sweeping across dunes. You feel exposed, as though even the sky can see straight through you, but you also feel strangely calm, as if the rhythm of the builders still beats in your veins. You replay the lessons. The water jars lifted carefully from canals, the mudbrick shadows stretching thin against the midday blaze, the sting of oil smeared on skin, the scratch of linen tunics shielding flesh. The early dawn marshes time too. The sun, the laughter that blunted pain, the whispers that guarded secrets. Every moment of endurance stitched together into a tapestry of survival. Historians still debate whether these workers were slaves, paid laborers, or something in between. But what's clear is that no one survives the desert without ingenuity. And here's the odd detail. Some builders reportedly tied reeds to their sandals so the sand wouldn't burn their saws. A simple hack that feels as ingenious as any pyramid blueprint. You smirk, because it's not so different from people. Today, duct taping saws to survive a music festival in the summer heat. Different millennium, same desperation, same creativity. The Nile glimmers faintly in the distance, a silver ribbon threading life through a land determined to crush it. You realize that without its waters, without the community's chants, without the shade of awnings and the careful timing of meals, none of this, the pyramids, the temples, the legends, would have survived. And maybe that's the final twist. The monuments look eternal, but what made them possible were fragile. Everyday strategies to beat the sun 1 more hour, 1 more day. You think of other ages, other places. Bedouins guiding camels through scorching dunes, their faces wrapped in indigo veils. Australian Aboriginals reading the land for hidden waterholes. Soldiers in World War II's desert campaigns, carrying salt tablets to keep from collapsing. Modern marathoners pouring water on their heads, swearing each splash buys them another mile. Across centuries and continents, humans keep rewriting the same story. The heat wants to take everything, but we find ways to laugh, to shade, to endure. You take a deep breath, the cool night air filling your lungs like a reward, and you realize the real survival secret isn't hidden in stone blueprints or forgotten scrolls. It's right here, in the rhythm of breath and body, in the ability to adapt, to find shade, to share water, to tell a joke even when the desert feels endless. Survival is less about overpowering the elements and more about learning to bend with them. You let your eyes close just for a moment, and the world blurs into a haze of firelight, starlight, and memory. You can almost hear the faint scrape of chisels, the murmur of gossip, the laughter rolling like waves across the sand. And then it all softens, slipping away, until only calm remains. The desert fades, the noise dissolves, and your body feels as if it's sinking gently into cushions, safe and still. You're no longer standing in the heat, no longer straining against the sun. You're floating, carried by the same resilience that kept the builders alive, rocking you like a lullaby whispered across centuries. The story doesn't end with stone. It ends with rest. The heat has passed. The night is yours. End of script. Good night.